Hi, and welcome to Indigo Starfire. My name is Bevin, and in this video, I'm going to be doing a subscriber request topic and looking into the question, what does the runner in your connection experience start to finish? So thank you so much to the subscriber who recommended this topic. A few months ago, I've been sitting with this, meditating on this, trying to really channel and create some kind of an outline or a structure that can help explain the process of kind of those initial phases of that soul connection, the breaking point that causes the runner to pull back their energy or to cut themselves off completely from the connection. And then what's happening during that period of silence where so much is left to speculation, where, the chaser, the one that was just left stranded, the one who had been ghosted or blocked, when they are left with a lot of questions. What goes on the other side of that spectrum, on the other side of the coin, on the dark side of the moon, if you will, where there's, a lot of mystery, a lot that is unknown and uncertain. So again, I've broken this down from kind of like the genesis of the connection, that initial spark of connectedness with one another, and, the feelings and the sensations that kind of build up between the runner and the chaser, and then kind of what leads to that sort of point where the runner takes off. They run for the hills or, distance themselves, so that hopefully at whatever phase or stage of your connection you find yourselves in, this can provide a little more context maybe for what's going on in the other person, emotionally, spiritually, energetically speaking, to help you kind of navigate for yourself what the best path forward is as far as holding space or maybe detaching and moving forward in other ways. So to start with, those initial kind of phases of the connection, the fireworks period of the connection, that is what I am defining as the spark. This is that fascination. Somebody catches your eye. Maybe this is somebody, that you encounter in an online connection, somebody that you see across the crowded room. You go on a blind date. Maybe this is somebody who's in a mutual friend circle, or, a coworker, somebody you encounter out and about. And there is this, kind of curiosity, sort of who is this person? A sense of maybe even like deja vu, soul familiarity with one another. There's an openness towards this other person that may be quite uncharacteristic. You're feeling, and they are feeling, very much a sense of homecoming, maybe being a lot more forthright about, aspects of themselves that ordinarily it takes some time to open up about these things. There's a sense of really being in synchronicity and harmony with one another, being able to really share a lot, or feeling this deep sense of connectedness with one another, even after having shared relatively little contact in those initial kind of hours or days or weeks or even months, or just that initial phase of kind of like coming into proximity with one another in the physical material reality in whatever way that kind of applies or resonates for you. On the other side of that, there may also be extreme shyness that the runner feels of just this sense of homecoming, the sense of vulnerability, the sense of familiarity, and almost becoming very self-conscious, kind of like, feeling very seen and very almost ashamed at the level of vulnerability, maybe even kind of oversharing, giving so much of themselves, even if they say very little, energetically speaking, kind of pouring forth into the connection, which can lead to a little bit of embarrassment after the fact. Like, did I just say that? Have I, been putting off these kind of vibes? Even if it's something very subtle, it's this energy of the magnetization toward being seen. And for some people also a little bit of hesitation about that, a sense that nothing can be cloaked, nothing can be hidden, which is very unusual and alluring, often very different from other kinds of connections, especially in early phases of these twin flame dynamics, past life soulmates, high level soulmate connections. It's just this immediate sense of, familiarity and oneness with one another. And again, that idea of like the deja vu, the soul familiarity, eye contact being very intense between two people, words almost spoken energetically without the need for language. It's just a lot of telepathy going on, a lot of being in sync with one another. Dreams start really kicking in. You're encountering each other kind of outside of the realm of your interactions with one another. There can be prophetic dreams, things that occur in other sort of states of that dreamscape that then play out in your interactions with one another, words that are spoken, conversations that are had, certain visuals that you see that then kind of are appearing in the material reality. There's a sense of feeling one another's energy around each other. So the runner definitely feeling your energy around them, which can be something that is almost, it's very subtle and may add to a degree of euphoria, or again, that kind of extreme shyness of, feeling watched, almost feeling very exposed, wanting to kind of cloak themselves or pull back in some manner, especially in that early phase of the spark. It may go largely kind of unnoticed. It's something that, it might be very unusual for their experiences with people. It might be something that, especially if they are, not awakened when you encounter them, when the two of you encounter one another, this could be somebody who's very traditional in terms of like a traditional religious view, very kind of like a logical, practical, focused on kind of 3D mundane reality and concepts such as energy transference, astral travel, telepathy. All these concepts could be very foreign to them. If they know of these things in name only, they have no kind of tactile experience necessarily to really apply that. It's all just theory. And until that point of intersection, until that very practical application, it sort of lacks the depth necessary to truly understand until that experiential happening occurs. And then that can kind of lead into sort of the next phases of what kind of occurs. And along with this idea of the spark is also where Kundalini awakenings happen, heart chakra activations, spiritual awakenings, just a whole buzz of energy occurring throughout the subtle body that can happen very immediately. Some people report that this happens, almost immediately on contact with one another. Other times there's this sense of almost becoming familiar with one another, kind of lingering in that fascination stage, being drawn to one another like a moth to a flame that is very reciprocal. And it is a certain point of exchanging in this capacity, kind of moving in closer to one another, that braiding of the energy happens. And it's like the light is turned on. That's when the Kundalini awakening happens. That's when the spiritual awakening, that's when the heart chakra activation happens. And it can be so sudden and so jarring that it almost sort of jolts one into a sense of, euphoria, hyper awareness on some level. And, initially when these things kind of happen, it can definitely be this feeling of elation, this feeling of elevation, this feeling of intensity, the rush of which is so unusual that there is almost, where this is happening energetically, but it's taking a while for kind of the conscious mind or the ego mind to really catch up with that process and what's happening. So that can be where you're really in sync with one another. You're both feeling the connection. The sparks are flying literally between the two of you and figuratively. Things are going really well. It feels that there's this momentum building towards something greater than what you've experienced before, that wherever you are at in the connection at that point, which leads into the next phase, which I have defined as infestation. That is where, the intensity, it just keeps building and building and building. And what may have just been a trickle all of a sudden becomes this deluge. Signs and synchronicities everywhere, angel numbers, seeing this person's name, and vice versa. This is definitely something at these, at this phase right here, whether or not this is discussed openly, it is very mutually experienced in twin flame connections, in past life soulmate connections, like high vibrational soul connections, even some karmic connections or catalyst connections that for various purposes, two people have intersected with one another in this particular lifetime in order to kickstart or jumpstart a certain level of ascension or awakening. I will go into that in a future video about kind of the distinction between catalytic catalyst flames, catalytic soulmates, and twin flame connections, because there is definitely a distinction between those two phenomenon and experiences, but a lot of these same kind of clues or signs or experiences can really occur on both polarities of that. So it can be very easy to kind of confuse when we get caught up in the need to define and in kind of the early phases of that, especially if you're entering into something like this with no kind of like background information, no preparation. It's all just a new experience, that there can be this urge to kind of search for meaning, search for definition, search for answers, and often kind of grab onto the first thing that seems to apply to the situation, although a lot of times there are kind of deeper layers and levels, and it's part of the ascension and healing journey to come to a place where we are almost forced to sort of put those definitions aside to wrap our mind around a different understanding of what a dynamic with a certain person is. But again, that's a topic for a future video. So in this phase of like the infestation, those dreams are really increasing. That deja vu is really increasing. The feeling of the energy around, which may have initially been very subtle, something is now, kind of, it almost feels like the walls start to close in around the runner. They may start to get a lot of visions as well. This can tie in with that idea of like the Kundalini awakening, heart chakra activation, a lot of emotions kind of like surfacing, bubbling to the surface, both the positive and negative things that they have held inside. With that spiritual awakening energy, this can be psychic gifts that are really activated in some way. And, as much as they're kind of trying to understand this or navigate all of this in some level, kind of clinging to the previous reality, and yet there's this introduction of a new force or a new element in their existence. Part of them intuitively sort of like traces back to that crossroads period of interacting with the chaser, or, with the other person in that kind of dynamic, in whatever way that looks like. And it's a sense of meaning being established, that this is more than just an ordinary interaction with somebody. This is something on a spiritual level, on an energetic level, on a subtle level, it's outside of the box of just an ordinary connection. And especially for people who, again, don't have any kind of like spiritual, background, even for people with a spiritual background, definitely, having all of that kind of, understanding in that terminology and then putting that into practical application, it's a lot different when you're really, experiencing this firsthand. When the rubber hits the road and all of that kind of learning, all of this theory, all of these definitions, all of these connotations, when these are experienced very viscerally within your own life, within your own energy, it takes things to another level. It helps those definitions to become more realistic and more personalized. And so even for the most spiritually prepared, this phase, this experience can definitely be very intense. It can be very, it almost kind of like leads to the idea of like dark night of the soul, or some kind of dissolution of the ego, which is the purpose of connections like this, to kind of shift and expand our awareness and our perceptions. In this stage of infestation, though, as kind of, the energies are sinking between the two people, and there's this, soul knowing, there's this pull on the soul level toward one another for the purposes of growth. There's this awareness that is starting to come into, the conscious reality of something more to this connection, more going on behind the scenes, more than meets the eye. It can definitely trigger feelings of paranoia, a sense of almost feeling haunted, pressured, drained, off kilter, as your energies are reacquainting with one another through time and space. Each of you holds a key to unlock something spiritual doors within the other. These are things that may have been long dormant across lifetimes, whether this is dealing with a twin flame connection or like a catalytic soulmate, past life soulmate. It's this sense of almost the joy of reacquainting with that familiarity on the soul level, that soul from the previous lifetime, from these previous incarnations and experiences. And with that is both this, very unique kind of draw towards this, special and kind of otherworldly bond. But then with that, on the other side of that door that is unlocked, are a lot of kind of like deeply embedded wounds, almost like baggage that has been carried along throughout lifetimes. A lot of people like to refer to that as karma. This can also really tie into, memories and kind of unfinished business between the two of you at the soul level from other incarnations, things that can really lead into visions of past lives with one another, visions of future lives with one another, things that are definitely outside of the box from just, boy meets girl, girl meets boy, whatever that looks like for you. It's something that this is another level. This is something that on the soul level, beyond definition, beyond time and space, it's a reacquainting and kind of an expansion of the perception of relationships and connectivity, destiny, fate, higher callings, even the awareness of the higher self on some level that may be very new, and it can be very, very overwhelming. It's something that, it's very intoxicating. It's becoming almost high off of one another's energies, and it also leads to, the expansion and subtle ways of light and shadow aspects within self and within one another. It points the way to distortions and unbalanced aspects within self that are needing to be calibrated and brought forth into the light of day, personally and between two people, in order to kind of point the way or set the stage or illuminate a path, not just for what can develop between the two people in the connection, but individually, like on a soul level. It's almost expanding the horizon of sort of what is possible. Work within to heal, work within to grow, work within to expand. All of that kind of ties into this stage of the infestation. And again, something usually within the chase, the one who is defined then as the chaser, they're leaning into it, they're loving it, they're pulling into this, they're putting a lot of focus on this other person. The one who is the runner is also putting a lot of focus on this person, but it's almost like they're kind of needing to sort of, be completely saturated, which then leads to a point of almost trying to back off. Like the intensity of it just becomes so frightening. And it is that kind of friction, which is really what starts the machine of healing that is possible in connections like this. The analogy that came through when I was channeling for the outline of this, with the idea of this infestation stage, it's almost like two people who are climbing a mountain, for example, with one another. And this is something energetically that happens very subtly. It happens very unconsciously. It's something where, the higher selves coming into contact with one another are pulling both up in sort of like the material sense, in the energetic sense, in the subtle sense. You're both climbing, you're both kind of in that spark, in that pull, in that sense of elation. One person sort of stops and looks down, sees how far they have kind of been uprooted from their idea of love and partnerships, from even just, undefinable aspects of connectivity with other people, the potential that is being unlocked, those kind of spiritual doors that have been unlocked within one another through these keys at a soul level that each person holds. And that person who looks down panics, and almost that's where the running stage comes in. That's where the, that kind of sense of overwhelm of like, ooh, I don't know if I can handle this. This is a little bit too intense. All these signs, all these dreams, all these visions, all these things on a subtle energetic level that are really being kickstarted, all these emotions. Again, it's kind of lacking that conscious and logical ability to define these things, even for somebody with kind of a spiritual background. In practicality, there is a disconnect between that soul knowing and the conscious ego mind that is always the case. It always takes time to kind of work to bridge that gap individually. So panic is a very natural kind of response to that, of just having moved almost very unconsciously out of one's element, out of what one has defined as like normal or regular, or, you know, the kind of the state of vibration, the place in their life, the horizon they were looking toward, the tools they were operating with, having been almost subtly introduced to the potential of more, can bring in this kind of overwhelm at the raw power and potential which is now within reach. It has now been accessed. It has now been activated on some level. So it is at this phase of kind of like the two people climbing the mountain. The one sort of looks down, and you know, that's where kind of gravity kicks in. And that starts then the next phase, which is just simply defined as run. And, you know, if you've been in that kind of runner-chaser dynamic, you're definitely familiar with that point. That's where the anxiety kicks in. That's kind of the fear of one's own light, that fear of the potential, a sense of vulnerability because of these hidden shadows and darkness that have been kind of unearthed. And it's the question of, you know, can they truly see me? Am I ready to truly look myself in the mirror? All of these being very, you know, subtle and kind of like unconscious questionings that really just lead to a sense of needing to backing off very abruptly. You know, this is where the blocking comes in, the ghosting, coldness, deception, energetic pullback, evasiveness and excuses, self-sabotage, self-medication, hostility, all of that, where it's just, you know, it's an attempt to kind of like climb back down that mountain, to fall down that mountain of, you know, this elevation, this expansion that has been activated, that has been turned on, that the two of you have tuned into without meaning to, but on a subtle level, on an energetic level, through this intersection, through your experiences with one another. Through just on, you know, in whatever way this applies, whether this is somebody, you know, that you're dealing with in the physical world, something that's an online connection, you know, whatever that looks like for you, there's still the exchange of energy. There's still that kind of tapping into one another at the soul level. And so once that point of intersection happens, once that connection happens, it kickstarts, it sets into motion, you know, a series of different kind of wheels that are turning to kind of elevate each of you onto a new level of your journey. And, you know, the one who kind of leans into this energy of the runner. And keep in mind that both the chaser and the runner can exchange positions with one another throughout the dynamic of the soul connection, of the twin flame dynamic. There can be periods where, you know, the runner kind of goes through these cycles and phases, and then they are returning in some capacity, only to have the chaser kind of switch roles with them. Then they're the one backing away. So it's a cosmic dance on an energetic level between two people. But at this stage of running, this is a very necessary stage for the connection to ascend to its highest potential. And it's definitely something to, you know, food for thought is to try and reframe as much as, you know, there's sorrow and there's anger and there's disappointment and there's longing experienced. If you find yourself in kind of the role of the chaser during that separation, during that period where, you know, the runner has booked it, they have gone off, they have, you know, fallen into that kind of, or chosen rather, the path of fear, and you're kind of left stranded in love alone, so to speak, you know, wondering what happened, wondering what went wrong, still feeling and still experiencing, both people still experiencing all of that stuff that happens during the spark, during that infestation stage, you know, those dreams, those signs, those synchronicities, energetically, the telepathy. But instead of it being so intense and so, you know, like real time in this proximity where you're face to face, literally or figuratively with one another, it's almost like that connection has stretched. But that point of intersection, that bond which has been remembered between two people, it is not broken during this phase. It's almost just elongated in some way, which can lead to a lot of frustration. It can lead to a lot of fixation because, you know, the runner is frustrated because unlike other kind of connections or situations where, you know, it might have been too intense, they may have, you know, kind of felt that they weren't ready or weren't prepared or they weren't looking for kind of what they were being called into, you know, at a particular sort of time or an experience with a person. For some, it's almost like just a lack of compatibility on some level. And so they, you know, they disconnect, and that just kind of ends it. That just sort of severs that interaction, that intensity with another person. In a situation of a twin flame connection or like a past life soulmate connection, that running doesn't stop that kind of exchange on the higher self level, on the energetic level, which can be very frustrating for the runner. On the part of the chaser, again, it's this acute fixation with, you've pulled away and yet I still feel you. I still feel this communication with you. It's almost this polarity between, the higher self reality of oneness, of union, of connectivity, and the 3D polarity of that disconnect, of that separation, of that distance, which part of the healing journey is to learn to expand the perceptions of reality. This and that are true. It is not an either or, it is a both scenario. And so that's kind of where the juggling act comes in during that phase of separation, is learning to be able to hold space for that kind of higher level union, and also to hold space and maintain an understanding of the reality of whatever the runner has decided on a 3D level, on an ego-based level, is in their best interest, is what they are wanting to do, is what they're compelled to do. Everybody has free will, and so the choice to choose the path of love or fear is always available to all of us at any point in time. And by stepping into that role of the runner, it is exploring that path of fear. And so then the chaser is tasked with, kind of exploring then what they have available to them, which is, the path of love, not trying to sort of leap timelines onto that path of fear and continue that pursuit, but really kind of, evaluating and inventorying, what remains, what is available, what is kind of unbreakable, and what is true. And that is that path of love. So it is through the gift of separation that each individual person in this dynamic has the ability to come into their own sense of wholeness. And it is through that cultivation and understanding of one's own sense of wholeness, confronting the light and shadow within each of us, that we are then able to, come back together in a 3D sense, and to be able to sustain, maintain, and contribute to the energy of a higher level divine partnership, so that climbing further up that mountain in the future, there's either not the tendency as much to second guess, look down, and kind of fall away, or at those points where it's necessary to kind of look down, inventory kind of where we are, where they can inventory where they are, to understand kind of what has unfolded, the direction that is being kind of reached toward. There's less of a tendency to kind of lean back into those fear responses and sort of fall away. So beyond this phase of running, this is kind of where the big question is sort of, well, what's happening? They've run, it's radio silence, been ghosted, been blocked, what's going on? And so the way that it has kind of, that I'm sort of defining this or breaking it down, is utilizing the 5 stages of grief. And this is, again, going to be from the runner's perspective. And a key note here is that this period, after that, they've bolted, they've ghosted, they've blocked, they've pulled away, whatever that is, they've kind of severed the euphoria, the bliss, the kind of honeymoon phase with one another. At this point right here where, both individuals are just kind of in their own corners, sort of dealing with all of this, what has been surfaced, or what has been unearthed, what has surfaced for each individual in terms of different kind of shadows, fears that have been triggered, wounds of abandonment, wounds of, like fears of commitment, fears of vulnerability, feelings and fears of not being good enough, just whatever that is for each individual. It is at this phase of kind of individual work that needs to start through that gift of separation. This is the make or break point. Some people are lost in this fire of transformation and transmutation. Others are forged by it. So again, everybody has free will. That separation is a gift. We all have the ability to choose to receive the gift or to, pass it by and kind of continue along in the status quo. So with that being said, there is no guarantee that every runner will successfully choose to, cycle through this phase, this full circle, back to that point of reconciliation or being able to kind of build toward the connection. Just as in, dealing with a grief associated with, loss of a loved one, for example, transitional periods in our lives, things, different kind of tower moments that happen, changes that happen. People can get stuck in certain phases of grief for decades. Some can never move on, from that in the course of their lifetime, or choose not to. They choose to remain very much in like denial or anger, for example, which are those initial phases of the 5 stages of grief. If you're curious about what those are, and this is just kind of like a brief overview, and again, applied to the idea of like a runner-chaser dynamic in a twin flame or past life soulmate, or like a divine soul connection, you can definitely research the 5 stages of grief. It's a formula that was created by the psychologist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. It's pretty well known. There's a lot of literature out there about this, so it might be something to research that. You can get a different sort of understanding about that. This may even help you in different ways. It's a good kind of formula to apply for other aspects of shadow work. So some of that healing that the chaser, if you find yourself in the runner phase at different points with this individual you're kind of curious about watching the video for, or other people that come into your life, this can definitely be a very helpful kind of framework to apply to that kind of task of working through one's own shadow and sort of understanding the layers of fear that we hold within ourselves. But it's something where, again, a lot of people don't choose to kind of move beyond that. It can be very kind of like difficult. It's a lot of self-forgiveness work that's involved in all of that. But it's something that it definitely, it applies to kind of what is happening in this phase, in this stage of having run. Because on the higher self level, there is still that union, between the two of you. And so there's almost this, it's the ego that has activated that kind of running, that fear, that disconnect. And so there is this element of kind of mourning that, because the higher self is wanting that, kind of unification between that 5D and that 3D. It is wanting that resolution. It is wanting that healing. It is wanting that higher level love to really kind of manifest and take place on the material plane. But in order to do that, there are certain aspects and elements within the individual. This is dark night of the soul territory. This is dissolution of the ego territory. The ego death, all of these things, and kind of that rebirth, that phoenix from the ashes energy. That's where all of this really kind of like takes place, is in this stage of separation and moving through those kind of elements of the 5 stages of grief. Some people do, and then you can come back together with one another and build toward a different sort of understanding, build toward more of a succinct relationship with one another. For others though, the runner, or even if they come back, maybe the chaser has grown and evolved in another direction. But sometimes the runner just decides on an ego level, maybe even a very unconscious decision, they stay very entrenched in those fear-based patterns. So there is no guarantee that everyone will successfully move through this. This is the potential of what is available. These are kind of the steps that are necessary to fully sort of make the most of that instinct to run, to make the most of that gift of the period of separation with one another. So the first stage in this 5 stages of grief, of what that runner is experiencing, what they are going through in that period of separation, in the silence, kind of off on the dark side of the moon, in their own kind of corner there, where you're not really sure what's happening. A lot of this can be, very internal. It's often something which is held within. The chaser often will manifest this outwardly a lot more. They're discussing it, they're journaling. It's more of that outward expression, that kind of pursuit, that application. The runner, this is more of an internalized process. It's very secretive. It's something that's definitely held within. And so that first stage is denial, and that involves the suppressing of feelings, the denying of feelings, blocking energetically, blocking you on social media, blocking your phone number, ignoring your calls, ignoring your messages, ignoring the signs, ignoring the number syncs, ignoring the dreams, ignoring the telepathy, turning a blind eye to the connection. This is the, I don't want to see it. I don't want to know about it. I don't want to hear about it. It's the shutdown. It's the stuffing, it's the suppressing. It's usually leaning into some form of shadow or coping mechanism. It's kind of like the extreme blanket version of that, of like being non-confrontational, not wanting to deal with it. It can best be summarized as like the avoidance of change or the fear of change, of just kind of like, if I, try to backtrack, if I try to just like stand still in place, then everything will just remain the same. This idea of almost like no choice is a choice. So becoming very like firmly rooted in trying to grasp or hold on to kind of the sands of the version of who they were before having encountered you. And we're talking who they were on an energetic level here, on a soul level, before that kind of opening, before that awakening, before that aperture was created to something more within themselves, and through the interaction energetically with you and the connection. It's this idea of trying to hold on to those falling sands as they're slipping away. Something has really been activated. Some process has really been kick-started, usually having to do with some level or some combination of like awakening or activations on the soul level, on the subtle level. And so it's the ego kind of like putting up that fight, saying, no, I'm not going to participate in this. I'm not going to do this. This is too much. I don't want this. I'm not interested in this. And so it's just deny, deny, deny. That's the first stage of that 5 stages of grief. The second stage then is anger. This is where confrontations happen, lashing out, speaking down on the connection or about the chaser to other people, seeking to almost project out or demonize the connection and those feelings in an attempt, again, because a certain amount of suppression, there's been something that has been activated. There's an elevation, there's an ascension which is happening through these soul connections. And so you can only push down and suppress so much. So, at a certain point, it's almost like their will to kind of stuff and that pressure, it's overridden by the power and the intensity of the energy being exchanged. Even in separation between two people, it's greater than the power of what has been unearthed and activated within them individually, and is really seeking to come to the surface. This change that is already in motion within them as the individual, for them as the individual. And so kind of, then the pushback from that stuffing and suppressing is almost this like purging kind of energy. And it may again kind of lead into this energy of resentment, of anger. They are unable to sufficiently kind of like stuff down or shoo away these feelings and these signs and these sensations. Unlike other connections where, there's a cutoff, there's a disconnect, the momentums are thrown away, the phone number is deleted, the pictures are erased, whatever that kind of looks like, the relationship ceases to exist anymore. That connection, that point of oneness with another person, it's quickly unraveled. In this circumstance, doing all of those things, trying to, kind of erase those memories of what was shared between two people, it is insufficient. Those previous tactics do not work. Denial can also, that previous stage of denial can also tie into, leaning into third-party situations in any kind of form. This can be like other sort of romantic connections. Self-medicating is an aspect of denial as well. Just any kind of like surface-level distractions, immersing themselves in work, to try and just kind of like forget and suppress and stuff and deny things that in the past or in other sorts of connections and other phases of their life and other experiences have worked are not sufficient in this situation. That's where the anger comes in. It's almost the idea of like the wounded inner child is also being brought to the surface on some level through what has been activated, and the continued participation with one another on an energetic level, even across the distance. The wounded child is like being told, go clean your room, kind of do that shadow work, address this wounding, look in the mirror, do this healing. And, kind of like a bratty little child is just like, I don't want to do it. You can't make me. I don't want to. I want to play. I don't want to do this work. I want to keep things exactly the same. I don't want to grow up. And so this is where, kind of rumination, stewing on the intensity and confusion of the connection, of fear and wounding that has been triggered, the shadow that has been triggered, that really comes up. This can be something that is there's so much like negative attention that is being almost directed not just on the connection or on the chaser, but also a lot of this resentment at kind of what's been disturbed within that runner, that this may almost be perceived by that chaser as like psychic attacks emanating from this other person, from this runner. All of this kind of resentment, again, because you're still energetically connected with one another. You're picking up, and it's this exchange of information back and forth. They are sensing your longing, you're sensing their kind of resistance. And so it's something that can be almost like misconstrued in a lot of ways. Sometimes it is, just very directly like negativity being directed at that chaser, very much internal. Other times it is kind of like in an outward sense, kind of acting out, lashing out, being very cruel, being very callous, just trying whatever to try and silence and get rid of this sense of oneness that continues on an energetic and a subtle level, despite actions that have been taken in the material sense to kind of turn that off, to shut that off, and it can't be, it won't be, not at this phase. It's also the idea of like pushing away the memories and the energies, and it's experienced as kind of a heaviness by that chaser. The runner is just like, I don't want any of this, and they're kind of just like shoving all of that work or that shadow that's needing to be done, trying to create almost like a roadblock to, and again, this is not really conscious. This is almost like on an energetic or an instinctual level, trying to just kind of block all that out. And it creates almost like a log jam or a backlog in this kind of energetic flow back and forth. And so the chaser then is often sort of like they're feeling that. They're feeling those blocks. They're feeling that heaviness of sort of all of this unhealed shadow, all of this kind of like wounding, all of this fear within that runner that is being perceived by that chaser, which can be misconstrued as well as kind of like, and on some level it is resistance, but it can be misconstrued as just kind of, the idea of stonewalling, and it may almost be a combination of that, but then also picking up and sensing and being given like an energetic concept of the weight at which they are tasked. That runner is tasked with kind of creating lightness and flow within themselves. The chaser at this stage can often feel and sense those energetic blockages. It may be manifesting, in different blockages in the chakras, a lot of kind of like shared grief, things that runner is not willing to process or is not kind of doing their fair share of the work, what has really surfaced for them. This can almost lead to the chaser trying to overcompensate in a way, to try to do the healing for both people as a result of what they're kind of picking up and perceiving, which is non-participation and kind of an antagonistic or an attacking sort of energy on the part of that runner. The next phase of this of that stage of grief is the bargaining phase. And this is usually something, before I get into kind of what this involves, this usually is kick-started for some. It can be, just through sort of the initiative of that runner, to kind of like do the work within themselves, to start to really heal. It can often happen through, this phase of kind of like denial and running and stuffing and suppressing what has been activated, that there's a bit of divine intervention that happens as well. So other tower moments, other things that can happen is almost like this domino effect of avoidance. Sort of the, ground zero of that is when they detach from that chaser, and they go off, they run off into the element of fear. Only something has been kickstarted within them that will not allow them to sufficiently kind of like fit back into their world and their reality. Other tower moments may start to happen. Other things may start to crumble. They have been awakened on some level through this connection, energetically speaking, and it's impossible to go back to sleep. It's very difficult to sort of fit back into that life and reality again that they were in before. Again, that the analogy of like sands kind of falling through their fingers, and they're struggling to hold on to that. So for some, at a certain point, that kind of wake up call is loud and clear, and they start to really do some work within themselves. They start to try to alleviate their own burdens. But oftentimes this next phase of bargaining, it really does stem, and it leads into the fact that the chaser has more power in a certain way than they give themselves credit for in connections like this, in situations like this. As the chaser begins to detach from that energy of running, from that energy of pursuing the runner, they start to refocus, redirect their own energy onto themselves and kind of allow that runner to do what they're going to do. Allow that runner that time and space to kind of ruminate, to change or to not to change. The chaser starts to really sort of shift their approach, their tactic, their response or reaction to this situation. Again, that sensing of the union on the higher self level and the confusion of, if this is true, why is this 3D reality so different from what is also apparently reality on those higher self levels? As those questions, as that focus is then directed inward to start to do that work, to start to do that healing, it alleviates a lot of the energetic pressure that the runner may be experiencing. As the attention is kind of taken off of them, it is just shifted off of them. It's the idea of that oneness that has been stretched and is very kind of taut. It snaps back to them like a rubber band almost. And then that runner is sort of they're not feeling clogged. They're not feeling, claustrophobic. They're not feeling that energetic pressure very inadvertently. Even if it's something where you're respecting, the runner's wishes to be left alone, you're not contacting them. Still, energy flows where attention goes. And so the fact that the chaser is focused on in any way on the runner is received by them on some energetic level. So when that focus is taken off of that other person and put onto oneself, growing, healing, expanding, leaning into a sense of abundance, learning to love oneself, cultivating and remembering that sense of wholeness that we all hold within ourselves, it allows that runner the opportunity to start doing that themselves. That's where this bargaining phase can come in. This is kind of like the Page of Swords energy, where all of a sudden the runner almost in a way can become the chaser. They start to look around. They start to look around at kind of what were they fearing. They start to be able to look in the mirror and kind of face their own shadow. They start to really almost perceive or even sort of like miss. There's a bit of kind of longing for that energy of pursuit. Hey, chaser, where did you go? Why? I was so used to running. Why did you stop chasing me? It's that kind of an energy right there with bargaining. This is where spying comes in, research comes in. Let me just see what they're doing. Let me just take a peek at this person, even though I told them I had no feelings. I never wanted to see them again. And leave me alone. And all this kind of like different sort of things that were done to kind of like block and suppress and bind the connection up and kind of toss it away and dismiss it. Because that energetic pressure is then lifted, they're forced to kind of look around and say, well, something's different. Where did that go? And again, that kind of the higher self, that soul level connection kind of brings them back to that point, that genesis, that square one, that place of kind of liftoff in this situation where, through interacting with one another, through coming into physical contact in whatever way with one another, something has really changed and shifted energetically speaking. So this is where, the Googling comes in, asking about you through the grapevine, researching soul connections for some, becoming open to the idea of soul connections and twin flame connections for some. You may experience them as like a hot and cold energy rather than just kind of this, rigidity or almost antagonistic energy or a lot of intensity. That energy of anger can also be felt as kind of like heat, and you can feel them around you as kind of like an energetic blanket. There may be something where it's like you're feeling them and then they're detaching. They're kind of like directing their energy, their attention towards you, and then also within themselves. That's kind of that understanding of that hot and cold dynamic as what you're experiencing, what's kind of going on behind the scenes. There's also an increase and a resurgence in those intense and desiring energies that were there during that initial kind of spark phase, that fascination, that curiosity, that softening almost of a very rigid stance. No becomes maybe. What if? Let's see. And it's, again, you can almost start to feel their energy around you in a different sort of phase, in a different sort of way. And now for those of you, where this is almost, you have detached yourself from pursuing this runner, focusing on this runner, fixating on this runner. At this stage, this can almost be felt as kind of an annoyance, where then you may find yourself leaning into kind of like the runner position. You're trying to just sort of shoo them away, swat them away. You're trying to continue to maintain your focus. Oftentimes there can be this kind of this sense of, all of a sudden, okay, you feel them, they're back. And then that kind of just loops each of you back into this runner and chaser cycle. You've shifted your attention. It's gotten their attention. Energetically, they try to get your attention. You take the bait. You're back in this cycle with one another. So it can be many rounds of this, many kind of phases of this. This idea of kind of like getting knocked down in order to have to get back up again, because in order to create full kind of movement and completion and growth through these things, it really is a journey within. It's a journey within to heal, to grow, and to ascend, and to, take back one's personal power and step into power and authenticity and autonomy, unlike what was known or experienced before this situation, or even ever in one's lifetime. It's really shifting into that alignment with one's higher calling and an ascension path. And so part of the task then at some point for that initial chaser kind of energy is to just almost be like water and just kind of like let that runner energy just flow by, as you feel them kind of resurge, as you feel them emerge again, energetically speaking, you feel them fixated, you feel their eyes, their gaze on you. You have these indications, or just a sense that they're kind of watching, they're looking, they're researching. Kind of the point of self-mastery is to, just sort of acknowledge that, and then just let that feeling go. Continue to focus on whatever you have shifted your gaze to, whatever you are trying to build or grow or become or learn or do or be, through kind of like the influx of these energies as a result of this experience. And again, this kind of like healing for yourself first and foremost, which is, the way, it's the recipe to creating success for yourself as a result of this experience, and also to kind of set the optimal stage for what the two of you can experience together in the future. So beyond this bargaining phase, after it's this little bit kind of like, let me get a little peek, let me get a little taste. Maybe I'll just open my mind a little bit. Maybe I'll just kind of tap back in. Then it leads into the stage of depression, which is where the runner realizes the grass wasn't greener on the other side. They recognized that they were running from paper tigers. What they were really fearing, the intensity of the connection, the love, the high vibration of love that, not just was given, but was experienced on an energetic level without really meaning to, without fully understanding what that was like, between and through each of you, through connecting on a 3D sense, and kind of picking up where you've left off at the soul level with one another across many lifetimes. That the fear of that, the idea of a paper tiger, is that fear was, it's just imagined. It was not as scary as they had made it out to be. And it's something where, there can be a lot of guilt and shame about that as well. Even more shadows that are kind of surfacing to be sort of worked through. This is where that longing comes in, knowing what you had now that it's gone. There's a lot of purging that takes place in this depression phase. This is like dark night of the soul, dissolution of the ego death, missing you, longing for you, sending those energetic smoke signals out, and kind of those thoughts of love, tapping into that telepathy, sending those signals, sending those beacons, popping back up, in the dream space, coming through in music, just all these different kinds of things that are the emanation of this individual, this runner, kind of getting closer to that higher self reality, bringing that ego-based self a little bit closer to that. that, you know, in some way that goes beyond kind of like 3D concepts of love and romance. There's a oneness here. There is a sense of home with this other individual, with the emanation, the manifestation of this soul into physical reality for reasons that defy explanation. And so it's this idea of almost, you know, the reflection of healing that is possible, the reflection of love that is possible. That is what has been run from. And it's this understanding then within the runner at this stage of depression that kind of what they were fleeing from is what they have been seeking within themselves all along. It is what has been lacking within themselves all along, that they may have been seeking outward and now must kind of go within to find. It's also the stage of grief about, you know, kind of that full force that, again, through all of this, there's a process which is taking place. It does not just have to do with kind of the 3D actions of other people. This is, you know, or free will even is sort of obsolete in when something like this has really been activated. You know, when twin flames come together, when divine counterparts become aware of one another, past life soulmates, there are larger spiritual forces and mechanisms at play that usurp the ability of free will on an ego level. You know, there's something that has been activated. There's something that has been kickstarted. People can run around in this energy of just denial for a very long time. It can be a very arduous and painful process of like tower moment after tower moment, you know, small victories in order to sort of topple down again until that gaze is turned inward, until that work is done inward, not for, you know, the purpose of what can the two of you achieve on a romantic 3D level, but for the purpose of the growth of the soul, the purpose of the ascension of the manifestation of how you are appearing and moving through the world, through this 3D material reality in this time and space. That is the larger purpose of twin flame connections. It's an activation and it's a stepping into more of a healed and growth-oriented energy. Discontinuing patterns, breaking generational patterns, you know, closing out long-term kind of soul baggage that has been carried along through lifetimes, dealings and interactions with other people, coming into alignment again with gifts or like a higher purpose to bring forth something, to make this lifetime matter, to contribute something, you know, to be that change in the world one wishes to see. There are so many subtle levels and kind of purposes to this that process, it overrides kind of the other sort of elements of like the romantic feelings of the connection and that dynamic with one another. So that process continues to take place, that ascension, that spiritual awakening, you know, that kundalini activation, that heart chakra activation. There are ramifications and ripple effects of that are independent of the romantic connection between two people. This is on an individual soul level as manifested in 3D reality. And so in this phase of depression, it's almost like leaning into that larger kind of process that is occurring. It is through that place of almost the disillusion, you know, the breaking away, the falling away, the release, that then the runner kind of moves into this last phase, which is called acceptance. And this is, you know, admitting feelings for self, maybe about, you know, that they do miss you, that they do love you. This can be, you know, admitting to themselves that they don't have their life all figured out, that they have been living inauthentically, they have been living for other people, they have been people pleasing, they have been toxic, they have been codependent, they have been stifling their light, they are meant for something more, and they're kind of selling themselves short on a certain level. This is where, you know, the healing of self takes place in order to facilitate the healing of the connection. And it is through healing and forgiveness of self that the urge or awareness of the desire to heal the connection and make amends becomes evident and possible to that runner. So it's something that in that element of acceptance, if they don't do that internal work within themselves, then there's no ability to kind of like wrap up and complete that cycle and come forth in an energy of being able to build something new. It's just kind of that loop back around, the rerun of that same kind of cycle of, you know, sort of climbing that mountain a little and then falling back down. So it's definitely a journey within self first and foremost. In this phase of acceptance, that's where plans can be made to move forward towards you for reconciliation. Some of them may reach out in this phase, but again, it really is contingent on how much work they have done within themselves to grow. If they have not up-leveled in some manner, if it's from a place of longing only without having done the corresponding work, something to kind of match the frequency that you are cultivating within yourself, that you have grown toward, that you have elevated toward, then they are unable to sustain that change and will kind of be brought back down, or will, choose to move back down onto that level where, there's more kind of dissolution of that ego. There's something else that needs to be kind of like built and transmuted within themselves. This can lead, and be the result of that is kind of leading to repeated cycles of running and chasing, where they almost try to bypass or aren't aware, or through almost trial and error need to be then shown through experience that something has to change within in order to create changes outside. It is in this phase of acceptance that the unblocking of communication happens, maybe even just unblocking of phone numbers without reaching out. It's some kind of action that is taken on the part of that runner, even if it's just quietly admitting to themselves, unblocking their heart to the reality that they have felt, maybe something very unique, very unexplainable, very undefinable, but very intense, very special, and very precious in the connection with you. And then the future is unwritten as far as what comes of that, what they do with that, what the two of you can or choose to or are able to do with that knowing and information together. In this phase of acceptance is also where heart-to-heart conversations take place. It is in that phase of acceptance of almost like self-forgiveness that then the runner is able to bring forth something to you that is more meaningful, that is more, honest, more emotionally based. They are able to show you their vulnerability without flinching. This is also where research of soul connections, resonance of that takes place. It is in that phase of acceptance that the self-healing work, the self-love work, the self-actualization work takes place. And that kind of like sets the stage for sort of the next manifestation of how they're going to show up in the material reality. This is where jobs change, relationships change, lifestyles change. Major changes happen in that phase of extension, or in that phase of acceptance. And what that really kind of leads into as well is this idea of working with the energies between the two of you, having kind of come full circle to this understanding that they can't extinguish it, they can't push it away, they can't will it away, they can't banish it, they can't block it. And so it's just this allowing it to flow back and forth, allowing themselves to be transformed, transmuted, using this as creative potential, as motivation to make changes individually within themselves. That opens the door to changes in the connection with you, to be able to come back forth, not in the energy of kind of like chasing out of a need to sort of fill a void, but with something tangible and meaningful to offer, so that something constructive can be built between the two of you as far as reconciliation is concerned, and kind of the actualization of a different kind of potential between the two of you. And with that being said, there again can be many rounds of these cycles that take place, but with each phase of the running separation cycle, there is an opportunity for shadow work, healing, personal growth to take place in order for each of you to seek, find, transmute, or alchemize all internal individual blocks or imbalances that limit the ability to give healthy and reciprocal high vibrational love to one's self first and foremost, in order to be able to give it and to receive it in a romantic connection with another. So again, these phases of separation really are a gift, and it can be very difficult to lean into that. That's part of the magic and art of detachment. It's something that it's not a one size fits all kind of approach. It's something that each kind of phase of that runner chaser cycle, it can be a different experience of that. Sometimes it'll be easier to detach. Sometimes that phase of kind of holding on, that pursuit lasts a lot longer. All of that has a purpose. But the end goal with all of that is kind of like become that love you are seeking first and foremost. That is the best way to kind of create the optimal possibility of success in the connection. Again, everybody has free will. Some runners will continue to run. It is just not their choice in this lifetime, or even with those larger mechanisms set in place. Regardless of kind of the outcome in this tangible 3D reality, this particular lifetime, what is kind of activated within them, what starts to take place within them, the culmination of that may not be intended to be fully realized for several more lifetimes to come. It may be part of that soul blueprint, tying in with free will, or again, just kind of a larger sort of plan in place at the soul level and at the divine and cosmic level, that those wheels, that mechanism be set in motion, that this process will create a soul memory. It will be, kind of written down in that Akashic record. It will be, registered within that kind of soul DNA. It will be carried forth. Whatever work we don't complete in a lifetime is there waiting for us in another manifestation in lifetimes to come. So again, it's something where, really the optimal goal is to turn that gaze within self, utilize the experience to do what you can with what you have available, with what you're being presented with, the raw materials of, healing that needs to be done, self-love, self-forgiveness, compassion, taking your power back, standing in your authenticity, working toward an abundance mindset, breaking free of generational patterns, personal patterns, past life patterns, whatever that is for you. That's the best way to serve the connection and to really help on your part to set the stage for the optimal results to take place. Maybe that optimal result of 3D union is something that between you and this person isn't meant to happen for several lifetimes. Maybe it is something that is meant to happen in this particular lifetime. We can't control the free will of other people, but we can control our own free will. So again, that kind of back to that idea of, the chaser has the most power in this situation. Their choice to refocus in another direction, to shift where their attention is applied, creates a ripple effect upon that runner. It takes that energetic pressure off, to where that runner, it can then induce tower moments for them, where they are sensing something is off energetically. They no longer have reason to run. They only are running from themselves. This can begin that cycling into those 5 stages of grief, particularly leaning into those later stages of grief where they're starting to do the work. And that is particularly the case if you're dealing with a runner who has been stonewalling and who has been really just stuck maybe for an extended period of time in that energy of denial and anger. They've barricaded themselves there. You shifting your focus, it almost in a way takes out the mortar that has been holding those bricks in place. And then it is up to them to find out why they had constructed such an energetic block. Utilizing the attention that you had applied toward them in the situation that is then no longer there. How are they going to maintain that structure for themselves? Is it even necessary? What are they hiding from? What are they truly running from within themselves? And, it's something also that, everybody has to do the work for themselves, but, you two have activated one another very unknowingly as something kind of, written in your soul contract since before the dawn of time. This was the appointed hour and place for this to happen for reasons that are larger than, the logical mind's ability to comprehend. It's kind of in the grand choreography of the soul's blueprint. So trying not to get too kind of tangled up in that idea of like why and what's the outcome, but just utilizing this gift and this raw material for saying, how can I harness this force to become a change in my own life for better? How can that then ripple out into the lives and the world around me to become that force of change for better in whatever, large or small way that applies to for you? Utilizing this as the opportunity to heal, understanding that your heal triggers the aperture as well in this situation through which divine intervention, that divine light can heal, the situation on some level. That a lot of this, again, is in the realm of free will, but then there's also divine energy, divine forces at work. Everything has a larger reason or purpose. So while it's good to kind of know and have sort of an understanding maybe of where the runner is at in the particular situation, it's a natural part of this phase and this experience with people to, be looking at that. It's a sign that you have feelings and that you're an emotional person, to be very confused by such abrupt change, to run that full range of feelings within you. But then kind of the goal with all of that is, to detach and sort of refocus within yourself, on yourself, for yourself, and because of yourself first and foremost, and allow that other individual to really do the same. Trust in the process, trust in the outcome, and kind of the higher plan that is at place, trust in the divine to work with them, trust in their spirit team, trust in their higher self, and just really kind of use this as the opportunity to question and see what is that path towards your own sort of higher becoming, that betterment of self, becoming more loving, compassionate, forgiving, and empowered within self for yourself first and foremost, in order to be able to really elevate that bar, raise that kind of frequency and level, so that, if this runner chooses, or any runner that you are dealing with at any point in time chooses to kind of move through the process and grow through the experience, that they kind of have a point or a map or a trajectory of sort of where to arc their journey in order to kind of meet you and reach you on this different level, so that new results are possible, utilizing the new tools that you each have discovered within yourself and now have accessible to apply to developing a beautiful new phase or understanding or experience of your connection with one another. So I hope that this information was helpful to you. And again, thank you so much to the subscriber who requested that I look into this topic. This was very informative for me as well, sitting with this for a few months and channeling some information. So I hope that you got some value and benefit out of this as well. If you'd like a personal reading, I offer them through my Etsy shop. There's a link in the description box of the video for that. I offer a variety of pre-recorded video readings, written readings, and channeled letters. Turnaround time on everything is 5 to 7 days from the time of purchase. I also sell handmade jewelry, dream catchers, and sun catchers if you're interested in checking any of that out as well. And I've launched a second channel here on YouTube, which is called Lady of the Dawn Tarot. There's a link in the description box as well as in the channel section of my page for that. The format over there consists of pick-a-cards and general energy check-ins related to subjects such as spirituality, ascension, wellness, and self-love. So if any of that sounds interesting, I invite you to check that channel out. I thank you for your support there, as well as for your continued support here on this channel. So I hope to see you again in another video. Please take care and be well.